Now, remember when we were discussing on the structure and the function of various parts of the nerve cell, we said that a nerve cell or a nerve fiber that does not have the myelin sheath, it has a relatively lower degree of impulse transmission compared to one that has myelin sheath. So we expect along this axon the speed of nerve impulse transmission to be a little bit lower compared to this one here. That is the transmission of a nerve impulse along the myelinated sheath. So in a nerve cell that has the myelin sheath, the speed will be relatively higher because we said that along the membrane of the axon, there are constrictions that we refer to as the nodes of Ranvier. And the role of the nodes of Ranvier, as it is pointed by the cursor here, is to speed up. Actually, first it initiates, propagates, and then speeds up the rate of impulse transmission. So once an impulse reaches this portion, it is expected that it will be boosted, such that the moment it is jumped over to the next axon, the speed of transmission is much higher. So in short, the transmission of a nerve impulse along a myelinated sheath is actually faster, relatively faster compared to a non-myelinated nerve cell. Now, I want us to look at another important portion. Once a nerve has been transmitted along a nerve fiber, it is supposed to be jumped over or crossed over or passed over to another adjacent nerve cell. And this is the point at which we speak about the synapse. So a synapse is the transfer or the transmission of a nerve impulse from a nerve fiber across a gap, which is referred to as a synapse, and into another neuron or a gland or a muscle, that is to maybe the effectors for that matter. So what is a synapse? It is a microscopic space between two adjacent neurons, or a neuron and a gland, or even a neuron and a muscle. So we've realized that a nerve impulse, as it is traveling along the axon, it is electrical in nature. But when it is transmitted across a junction that we refer to as a synapse, it becomes chemical in nature. So I want us to look at the various types of synapse that we have. One of the synapse is the neuron to neuron, that is a synapse between two adjacent neurons. Maybe it is a sensory neuron that is having a point at which they come closer to the relay neuron. Remember, the relay neuron is located within the central nervous system. So at the point at which their dendrites come closer is the one that we refer to as a synapse. And therefore, if it is a neuron that adjoins another neuron, such type of a synapse, we call it a neuron to neuron. Then we also have another one that is a neuron that is closer to a muscle. And therefore, such type of a synapse is referred to as a neuromuscular junction. For example, in this diagram here, we have a neuron, and this neuron, remember this one is a motor neuron because it is connected to an effector, which in this case is a skeletal muscle. Remember, once an impulse reaches this skeletal muscle, the skeletal muscles will be excited and then they contract, and as a result, movement will be initiated to connected limbs. The last one is the neuron joined to or coming closer to a gland, remember a gland secretes substances or secretions that can be used in other parts of the body. Secretions could be hormones, could be substances that are needed for digestion, for example, saliva. So in between here, there is a junction. That junction is the one that is referred to as a neural junction or a synapse. So in this case, it is a synapse between a neuron and a gland. And remember again, this neuron is a motor neuron. Now let's simply look at what happens for an impulse to be transmitted across a synapse. Now, a synapse constitutes salient structures that enables its function to be permitted. For example, here, very quickly, if we look at what constitutes the structure of a synapse or a neurojunction, there is an axon, which is part of the membrane or part of the neuron that brings about the impulse, and the arrow here can be able to show the direction of flow of impulse. Then there is vast supply of mitochondria. Remember again, we said that there are cells that require a higher number of mitochondria, and a nerve cell is one of them. Then there is the cytoplasm, in which other materials are suspended, including the synaptic vesicles. Now, there are two main important junctions or endpoints that are very important here. This part here is the one that you call the presynaptic membrane. The presynaptic membrane has a unique feature in that at a given point it can be permeable to the passage of the sodium ions. Remember, sodium ions are the ones that initiate the transmission of the nerve impulse. And at another time, it becomes impervious to the passage of the sodium ions. Then, opposite to the other end, we have the postsynaptic membrane. Postsynaptic membrane. And in the postsynaptic membranes, there are receptor cells, in this case, proteins. Receptor cells, in this case, proteins. Then, of course, another important element here is the neuron transmitter. So let's look briefly what happens for a nerve impulse that is coming from that direction to come and cross over from the nerve cell, this nerve cell, into another one which is adjacent here. So once a nerve impulse reaches the presynaptic knob, sorry, not post, presynaptic knob. This knob here, remember it is club shaped. The synaptic vesicles will be stimulated and they will move towards actually the direction of the flow of the impulse. And at a point they reach the membrane of the dendrites of a nerve. So once they reach the membrane of the terminal dendrites, what happens is that the synaptic vesicles, they rupture. So once they rupture, they release a substance that is very critical in transmission of a nerve impulse. This structure is the one that we call acetylcholine. Acetylcholine. Remember, this is chemical, and that's why we said transmission of a nerve impulse along the axon is electrical, but across the synapse is chemical. So the acetylcholine that is released here is the one that makes the membrane of the postsynaptic membrane to be permeable or to dissolve, and therefore allow the passage of sodium ions. So once sodium ions reaches this point, they pass. So if they pass, then it means they get into the axon of the adjacent membrane, and therefore an impulse is transmitted. When you look at this structure, there are a higher number of mitochondria. What is the role of mitochondria here? Acetylcholine, once produced, it can decompose. It decomposes into two substances. That is acetic acid, in this case acetate and acetic acid is the same, and then choline. So once the two substances are formed, for continuous transmission of a nerve impulse, once it reaches the presynaptic membrane, it crosses over to the postsynaptic membrane. That process should continue again and again, and remember this, in a span of milliseconds or microseconds, if I may mention. So there is need for reconstitution of acetylcholine. So for that to occur, then energy is needed. And therefore, the role of this mitochondrion here is to provide energy for the reconstitution of acetylcholine from acetate and choline. And this process is stimulated or speed up by an enzyme that we call cholinesterase. So cholinesterase is produced again in this process so as to speed up the rate at which acetate and choline are reconstituted to form more acetylcholine that are bound inside the synaptic vesicle. So it is important to note that as the impulse is allowed to cross over, that impulse must continue in the same speed. And therefore, one of the role of the synapse is to ensure that an impulse speed is maintained as it is transmitted from a neuron to another neuron, a neuron to a gland, a neuron to a muscle, along the synapse. The other role of the synapse is to ensure that the impulse is traveling only towards one direction. Now, I'll leave it at that, but I want to play an animation here just to help you